4 duplexes, a bad beat syndication. This is my intro. I went through a lot of this, but I've been a broker investor since 2010. We did a couple syndications in 11 and 12. 2017, I joined an apartment investing group here in Austin, Texas that had a few dozen regular members. By the time I started attending, a number of the investors had already invested in a handful of deals that were sponsored by the organizer of the weekly meeting. So, I rode shotgun and listened to the stories and kind of got a comfort level with what they were doing, and felt good enough about the people involved that we decided to go ahead and make an investment when the next deal came through. The specific investment was, as the opening slide mentioned, a 4 duplex package. And our investment was a $50,000 equity investment. And the plan was for the operator to purchase those 4 duplexes, clean them up, get the rents up, and then do a refinance. I will go through the actual structure of the financing so you can understand kind of how that was to be structured. Okay, so this is the redacted prospectus for this particular investment. I've removed all the names of the operators. So essentially, if you look at the investment summary slide, what you'll see is the purchase price of the 4 duplexes was $500,000 total. So that's $125,000 per duplex. We had a rehab budget of $100,000, $25,000 per duplex. Once we're done, total finished cost, $150,000 per duplex, or $75,000 per door. We had a rent projection of $950, and the idea was they were going to hold it for about 5 years. They were going to do a refinance at that time. You can see that there is a seller financing note for roughly $400,000. And then there was actually, to take down the property and close on it, the difference between the two, let me bring this down to this next slide. The total investment was going to be financed to a $400,000 seller finance note, $150,000 worth of second lien debt from the investors, and then an additional $100,000 of equity. And we were the $50,000 of the equity. First blush, as far as I was concerned, it seemed like a great deal. I mean, you're buying properties, you're buying duplexes for $125,000 each that are going to require a modest rehab and going to rent out for almost $2,000 a month. Seemed like a pretty easy deal to manage. Didn't seem like a lot of room for screwing things up. And as I said, I gained some confidence with this particular investor. I won't get into the details of the investment thesis. I think I've highlighted it well enough by just saying it was a rehab and a rent up type structure. And then let me just get into the investment structure. This is always a very interesting piece of it, and something I know that everyone who invests in a passive syndication tends to focus heavily on. So initial financing, as we mentioned, seller finance mortgage at 6%. So this is the seller of these 4 duplexes was going to put up $400,000 note. Interest only payments for 12 months, balance due at the end of 12 months. Upon completion of the rehab and lease up, the sponsors of the project were planning to do a refinance. They had projected terms. They thought they could get a 5% interest 30-year AM on the refi and pay off the loan to the seller. And the sponsor was going to handle the property management, was going to take a 1.5% asset management fee, a $10,000 acquisition fee, and an 8% property management fee. Effectively, the two sponsors were a property management sponsor and a contractor sponsor. So that'll give you kind of an idea of what their roles were. You had one person involved in the lease up and the overall planning, and then another involved in the actual construction coordination. In addition, there was an asset management fee of 1.5% per year. And the sponsor was also a licensed broker and just made sure that it was understood that upon sale, they would earn a 3% commission. This slide talks just about the highlights of the rehab. The plan was to address the most common items that you would see in a rehab like this. There were smaller 2-bedroom, 1-bath units. The rehab was going to entail appliances, disposals, ice makers, add some granite countertops, put in some vinyl plank flooring. And then once again, as little repetition, some of these slides about the structure, but there was $100,000 in capital to fund the down payment, $150,000 second lien to fund the rehab costs, and also to have interest reserves to cover the seller financing note. And then once again, the plan was to get all this done within a year and refinance it at improved terms and get the credit for the higher valuation of the properties that had been rehabbed, thus allowing them to retire the second lien debt and the first lien debt simultaneously and put everybody in a better equity position. So once again, this is the sources and uses. This is the money coming in. This is where the money's going to go. The rehab budget. And then I won't dig into the pro forma right now. I think I'll just keep it high level. And if we want to come back and dig into some more details of the pro forma, we can do that if we have time and interest. So having run through that, let me go ahead and flip back to the PowerPoint and I'll tell you what happened. Okay. So in addition to the, let's get into the psychology a little bit of investing. So in addition to the deal itself, which we're always evaluating, and the sponsor's reputation and our general feeling about the sponsor, there's also your own internal motivations that you have. And it's, as we all know, I mean, we've moved into a buyer's market here recently, but for the last 10 years, it's been pretty crazy. And Austin has been even, crazier than the average as far as just the acceleration of the market and the availability of deals. So it's certainly tempting to gloss over some of these warning signs and to move forward on deals that maybe you shouldn't, but there is a sense that you keep passing on deals and you think I'm never going to get invested in anything, and your money's sitting on the sidelines while you're watching people make money. This is the FOMO that tends to make us careless. So the market was hot, and I mean, these syndicated deals were flying off the shelf. The sponsors could name their own terms. You'd even find yourself in a situation where if you ask too many rounds of questions, you'd get a response of, well, yeah, what a shame, but we're fully funded at this point, so maybe the next one. So you get a little bit of time with the syndicators, but there's they tend to move with often with the the squeaky wheels often get left on the sidelines. So certainly that was part of what was happening. But another thing that was really important on this particular deal was that we had kind of an ecosystem. We had a group of investors who were invested in a number of deals with this particular sponsor, and much larger deals like 20, 30 unit apartment complexes for $10 million. There was a lot of money that had already been committed to this particular operator. And my feeling was that part of the security in this deal was that if this sponsor didn't deliver, that it would tarnish the reputation across the board, and it would make it very difficult for them to get additional funding for future deals. So you kind of had this sense that you were kind of, the other deals created security for your deal, if that makes sense. So let's talk about some mistakes before we talk about some items that were missed along the way before we get into what actually happened. So a couple mistakes made along the way in hindsight. One is we took the equity instead of the second lien debt because the terms were better. Obviously, when everything's going great and when projects are successful, equity is a great place to be. You get a preferred return, you get a slice of the upside, and this particular investment had a 10% preferred return. So I was confident in it, so we went ahead and took the higher return and the higher risk. As we'll find out later, that will come back to bite this deal, because by being in an equity position, you're behind the debt players, and so when a deal hits the fan and the wheels come off, you're the last in line to receive your money. So always something to consider is, where do you exist in the capital stack, from the highest risk to the lowest risk? So mistake number one was we took the highest risk and the highest return. Mistake number two is, as a broker, I did perform some cap rate and valuation due diligence on the duplexes. That's just a fancy way of saying I tried to estimate on my own what they were worth and what they would rent for. And I was overly optimistic based upon my experience in Austin and the Austin surrounding submarkets. This particular submarket was about an hour and a half outside of Austin, and most of the geographic areas that I'd operated in were more like half an hour, 45 minutes outside of Austin. So it was just a much different market. So I was more optimistic than I should have been about the performance. The third item that I glossed over was the first lien loan and the refinance loan. So when I went through the loan structure from the seller financing piece, you'll note that it was a 12-month interest-only loan. It did not have a provision for an extension or a refinance, and that was something that I missed. And the problem with that is, if you don't get your project done in the 12-month period and you can't get refinanced, then you're caught in limbo. I mean, you could be in a situation where you could get foreclosed on. So that was a miss. And the other miss, kind of part and parcel of the same, was that the sponsor actually didn't have the credit score and just the credit history they needed to refinance out of this property. The fourth item that was missed in this particular deal was the property was advertised by the sponsor as being 4 duplexes, but later on we found out that legally it was a single piece of property, and that it was really an 8-plex. It was a detached 8-plex on a single lot, as opposed to 4 duplexes on 4 lots. And that is a very important distinction when it comes time to refinance or try and resell the property. The fallout. So about 6 months into the project, I received a call from the co-sponsor of the apartment investing group, who was not an operator of this particular project. He was actually just a sponsor of the meeting, to let us know that the sponsor had a nervous breakdown. So I put in there, I'm pretty sure Bernie Madoff had a nervous breakdown as well, but that wasn't really what it was about, was it? It turns out that every single project that was being operated by this sponsor, 4 or 5 active projects, with ours being the smallest, was collapsing, likely due to a cash crunch, and very likely due to commingling of funds between the projects in an effort to save all the projects and save face. Once the sponsor realized that their reputation was screwed, they basically disappeared, and just we couldn't find them, and all the investors were left to pick up the pieces. So this was actually a much bigger situation than just my investment and our project, it took out dozens of people on a handful of projects, and they were all left to their own devices to get together and figure out how to pull this thing out of a nosedive. So part of that, I think, was just a rehab budget optimism. I think that this, and I saw it on our project, and I'm assuming that it also was part of the problem with the other projects, was that they were just optimistic about how much it was going to cost, how long it was going to take. They didn't have the reserves in place, and it just they started falling like dominoes at that point. And then one less critical item, but it was definitely a contributor, was the sponsor, who was the broker and the property manager, who was taking the fees, ended up outsourcing the leasing function to a local property manager who was marginally motivated. So in other words, got spread too thin, wasn't really on site, as much as they needed to be, and was kind of trying to, just wasn't managing the manager. So, so that's where it all kind of came unglued for us and the rest of the investors. Recovery. So what happened next? It took years. Ultimately, the second lien lenders were able to pay off the first lien note. It did almost go to foreclosure. The seller of the property, who had the first lien seller note, did attempt to take it to foreclosure, but fortunately the second lien investors were in a position to pay off the first lien note, and then eventually get the financing necessary after probably about 2 years of renovations and releasing time. So they had one investor in particular who was capable of just taking it all down and basically saved the deal for the rest of the investors. But it took a ton of work. It took a lot of time, and some of the second lien lenders had to actually guarantee that loan in order to make this deal happen. So it wasn't an easy thing to save. Lessons I learned from all this. By far, the best thing I did is by the time I realized that the value of the property was less than the value of the total underlying debt, which is a nice way of saying that the value of my investment was zero, I moved on to more profitable projects. We actually ended up having a terrific year that year. It really is the only significant loss that we've had in our entire investing lives. So what we did is just said, you know what, we're not going to get sucked into a lawsuit where we have no money to gain. We're not going to get pulled into putting a lot of time and effort into it. So we effectively relinquished our position to the second lien debt folks and let them take the reins, and spent our time on a number of other projects that turned out to do really well and more than offset the losses from this particular project. So that was, as I look back on it, that gives me peace to know that we at least responded well at that point. Second lesson, passive isn't passive when the sponsor is incompetent or a crook. You really need to know who you're investing with, and it's really tempting to want to make your investment somebody else's job. And I've had deals like that have worked, but when they don't work, it gets really messy. The third bullet there, make sure you have the ability to grab the wheel if the deal is headed for the ditch. That's what the second lien folks were able to do. And I never would have imagined going into this deal. I say there, until you've been handcuffed in the back seat watching the crash, you can't imagine the frustration. I mean, as an investor and a syndicator and a broker, I knew everything that needed to happen to make this deal, to fix this. And I had no ability to do so. And by the time that the second lien folks were actually able to get the sponsors to sign everything over and step out of the way and return phone calls, it was such a, train wreck that there was nothing left to save. So it's really easy to look at the deal and say, well, I know how this could be fixed, but if you don't have the authority to do so, then it doesn't really matter. The fourth item there, just from a lessons learned, because I have a feeling you're going to ask me, like, what would I do differently? How could I avoid, them spending all the money or transferring the money out to other companies without our knowledge? The only thing I can think that we could have done better is to have not made our full investment up front and had treated it more like a progress payment standpoint, where we dole out the money and we get to have a quarterly review and see what's actually happening and ask questions before we're fully committed. Because once the money hits the bank, if you don't have control of the bank account, and it's just gone. So the fifth item, lessons learned, you can't sue somebody for $50K. I mean, it's you think, like, if someone does something illegal or they break the agreement, well, you're just going to go call your lawyer and fix it. In many cases, it's not possible, or certainly not worth. It's just throwing good money after bad, because it's very expensive to accumulate all that evidence and to sue somebody. The other thing I learned is it's better to have no deal than an unprofitable deal. That mantra has probably saved me in half a dozen other deals that I'll never know about, that I didn't invest in. I've always just believed that you're better off having your time and your resources, your dry powder and your time on the ground for waiting for the right deal, than to just get involved in something just because you feel like you need to. Last two items: don't get pulled in by FOMO. If it doesn't feel right, step away. And then closely tied to that, sometimes you're better off doing it yourself. That's how we started. That's still how we do 90% of what we do ourselves. And my philosophy is that I would rather be in less deals that I have control over, and make a little more money on each of those, than be in more passive deals. So I can say I've been a little bit disenchanted, even though I've had a few wins on the passive side as well. But since I am a full-time broker and I do have the resources, contractor resources, and the experience, I've found that I'm just happier being the operator. So